Sketch is an amazing piece of software that you can use to design web pages, apps, icons, and much more. You can even create prototypes and collaborate with other people in real time. And nowadays it's kind of hard to stand out when it comes to design software because there are so many good options out there, like for example Figma or Adobe XD. But if you're a Mac user, then Sketch is a very good option. It has a beautiful interface, it's fast, and it has some very powerful features like symbols, libraries, sketch data, support for P3 color, tons of plugins, and much more. So if you want to learn how to work with Sketch, then this course is for you. But hey, if we're just meeting, my name is Adi Purdila. I'm a web designer/developer, and my goal with these courses is to help you become a better web designer and developer. Now, coming back to this course, I'll assume that you are a complete beginner, so I'll show you the very basics of working with Sketch. We'll start by talking about the UI and the different types of layers you can use. Then I'll show you how to group, lock, and hide those layers, how to move, scale, and align elements, and also how to use guides and grids to create perfect layouts. You'll learn how to work with text, images, and basic shapes, and also how to create complex shapes with the vector tool and Boolean operations. You'll learn about creating, organizing, and reusing symbols, and also about a fantastic feature called Smart Layout. And finally, you'll learn about exporting assets in Sketch. And we'll do all this while working on a design that I've created specifically for this course, a design which you'll also be able to download for free using the link in the video description. And I'll also link any other third-party resource that I've used in this course, so feel free to check out the video description for more details. Now, speaking of resources, let me tell you about an amazing one that I'm using all the time, and that is Envato Elements. I use it to get fonts, icons, music for my YouTube videos, stock photos and videos, illustrations, and much more. You can even find tons of Sketch-compatible graphics like UI kits. For creatives like me, this is an amazing resource because all the assets have simple commercial licensing and you're not bound to any contract. Therefore, you can cancel whenever you want. So, if you're interested, check out the link in the video description. Now, let's start learning Sketch. And the first thing we'll do is have a closer look at what it is, who is it for, how much it costs, and a few reasons why you should choose Sketch over other apps. Let's go. Okay, so what is Sketch? Well, to put it simply, it's a vector graphics editor. But it's so much more than that. It's a digital design platform that offers tools for design, prototyping, and developer handoff. Now, Sketch has been around since 2010, and it was quickly adopted by a lot of people who got tired of using Photoshop for UI design, myself included. Even back then, Sketch was infinitely better for UI design than Photoshop, and using it was like a breath of fresh air. Nowadays, we're used to having software that makes it easy to design UIs, but back then, designing a website in Photoshop, for example, was a royal pain in the behind. Now, Sketch is not for everyone, obviously. It's not a Swiss Army knife that does everything. First of all, it's for Mac users. That's the only platform it runs on. So if you're a Linux or Windows user, sorry. There's also a Sketch app for iOS, but that's just for previewing documents, playing prototypes, and mirroring designs created on the Mac app. Then there's also the web app. This is not an editor. Instead, you can only use it to inspect designs and libraries, to export assets, leave comments, and stuff like that. The only way to edit a Sketch file is with the Mac app. So the first target audience, Mac users, okay? Second is designers, and here we're talking about UI, UX even icon design. Sketch is really good for creating icons, and you can even create illustrations with it because at its core, it's a vector graphics editor. However, it's not as powerful as something like Adobe Illustrator, but it can get the job done. So if you're designing websites, mobile apps, icons, or any kind of user interface, and you're using a Mac, then Sketch is a great option. When it comes to pricing, things are very simple because Sketch is subscription-based, meaning you pay a monthly or yearly fee and you get access to the whole package, the Mac app, the web app, everything. As you can see, Sketch costs $9 monthly or $99 yearly per editor. And if you want to try it out, you get a free 30-day trial, which is pretty cool. Just so you know, it wasn't always like this. Sketch used to be license-based. So you would purchase a yearly license that gave you free updates for that year. After the license expired, you could still use Sketch, but you couldn't get any more updates, so you'd be stuck at that version. If you wanted more updates, you would need to purchase another yearly license. Today, because the model has changed, you can only use Sketch with a valid subscription. Now, you might be asking yourself, why use Sketch over Adobe XD or over Figma or some other design software? Well, there's a lot to talk about here. So to keep it short, let me give you a few key points. First of all, Sketch is a native Mac app. And that's super important because being native, it's super fast, but it also integrates nicely with the operating system. It supports light and dark mode, local autosave, native font rendering, P3 color profiles, and more. Speaking of color profiles, Sketch is awesome when it comes to these. You can set documents to use either sRGB or P3. If you don't know, P3 is a wider color standard than sRGB, so that means it supports more colors, deeper blacks, and in fact, it supports about 25% more colors than your typical sRGB that you can find on pretty much any display/monitor that you can buy nowadays. P3 is not yet mainstream, but we're starting to get there slowly. Even CSS has some features that allow us to use P3 colors. And the fact that Sketch supports this right now is amazing. Another reason you might want to go for Sketch is the fact that it works offline. You don't need an internet connection to access your files, which is great. Sketch symbols are another reason you might want to consider. These allow you to reuse elements, to create libraries, to override properties for each symbol instance, and a lot more. And sure, the concept of reusing elements is implemented in other apps. Figma, for example, has something similar, but they're called components. But I feel that the way Sketch does it is just a little bit better than the rest. So with that said, if you're convinced that you want to learn Sketch, let's move on and do just that. We'll start with a tour of the user interface. And we're going to jump straight in here. I have the demo file that I mentioned in the intro video opened up here in Sketch. It's called Financial App Dashboard Concept. And if you want to follow along, then you can download this for free using the link in the video description. So I have Sketch opened up here. It's using the latest version, which at the time of this recording is version 89. And let's start with the toolbar. It's right here on the top, and its main purpose is to display the various tools that you're going to use, as well as the file name. From here, you can add various elements. You can access the collaboration tools. You can see your notifications, and you also have controls for zooming in and out and some other display settings. Now, this toolbar can be customized. If you right-click, you can choose to only display icons or icons and text. And you can even customize it further by choosing which items you want to display. So for example, if I don't want these two buttons in here, I can simply remove them. And if I want to add my own, I can simply click and drag anywhere on the toolbar. I can add the various tools, I can add spaces between items. And if I want to go back to the defaults, I can click and drag the default toolbar and have that show up. Moving on, let's have a look at the canvas. The canvas is the middle portion that you see in the UI. And this is an infinite surface. As you can see, I'm scrolling all the way out, and you can hold down the space key and then just click around, and you can place as many items, as many elements and layers you want in this canvas. As I said, it's infinite, so the sky is the limit, basically. And you can add whatever you want in here. Text, images, shapes, vectors, anything that can be created using the tools available in Sketch. So that's the canvas. Next, let's take a look at this left-hand side. Starting from the top, we have the page section. Sketch supports pages, which is an awesome way to organize the content inside your document. In this document, I have two pages, one for the master design file and another one for the various symbols I'm using throughout the design. And you can easily switch between them like this. You can also collapse this section entirely, this page list, and then you can switch from here. And at any point, you can add as many pages as you want. It really depends on what you need to do. Below the page list is the layer list. And this displays the full list of layers displayed in your canvas. I'm using artboards here, or a single artboard, which is this one. So the layers are displayed kind of under or inside that artboard. But you can have layers like outside, like so, and they will be displayed in the layer list as well. Also, on this left-hand side, we can find the components view. So we have the canvas view and then the components view. And this shows a list of all the symbols, text styles, layer styles, color variables, and templates from your document. And we'll talk about most of these in more detail as the course progresses, but just so you know, this is how you access them. You also have an insert window available. If you press C on the keyboard, it shows you a smaller window that you can use to search for a symbol, for example, a button, or you can search for a text style or a layer style or a color variable and so on. So this is a handy window. If you want to quickly access these components, then you can press C and it's going to be right there ready for you to use. And finally, let's take a look at the right-hand side where we can find the inspector. Now, the inspector will show properties for selected objects, and it's contextual, meaning if I select this text, for example, it shows me all of the available properties for that text element. But if I select, let's say, this shape, you'll notice that properties here change slightly. I no longer have text controls like I had previously. Instead, now I have controls for changing shape properties like fills and borders and such. Of course, there are some controls that are common for every element. So, for example, if I select the text, I can see the alignment toolbar right here, and also this area where I can control things like position and size. And you'll see that that's also available here when I select the shape. So that's the inspector, basically. And as we're doing stuff in this course, as we're creating items, we'll be using this quite heavily. But yeah, that's a quick look at the user interface for Sketch. So we have the toolbar on the top, we have the page list, we have the layer list, the component or canvas switcher, the canvas itself right here in the middle, and then on the right side we have the inspector. So that's the Sketch interface. I think it's very intuitive and it also looks awesome. Out of all the design software that we have nowadays, and that includes XD and Figma and all that, I think Sketch has the best looking user interface. And this is coming from a guy that's actually very picky about this kind of thing. Now, let's move on and talk about the different types of layers we can use in Sketch. That's coming up. In Sketch, layers are the building blocks of any design project, and there are several types. So, in this lesson, I want to go through each type and see what it's all about. Let's go. And let's begin with the first layer type, which is artboard. Now, an artboard is basically a collection of elements that sits inside your canvas. And you would most likely use this every single time you're creating a project, because instead of just placing your items on the canvas inside the group or by themselves, artboards give you this visual separation, but you also have some additional options, right? You can create artboard templates with different sizes. It's really useful for prototyping because you can jump from screen to screen. Plus, they give you a clear indication here in the layer list that, hey, this screen or this design is contained within a dashboard that has this symbol. So you can easily distinguish these from other layer types. Now, artboards can be created using the shortcut A or using the insert menu here and choosing artboard. Now, whatever the method, Sketch provides you with a couple of presets, and you can choose presets for Apple devices, Android devices, banners, icons. For the web, we have some predefined sizes. You can click on each one of these. Sketch will automatically create that artboard. It's going to name it, and you'll be good to go. And if at any point you want to change the size of the artboard, you can do so from here, from the inspector, either by using these controls or by entering a size manually, or you can change with another preset altogether. So maybe I want this to be a medium size. So that's pretty cool. Now, you can also rename an artboard by selecting it and hitting Command R. And as you can see in the layer list, it's now editable. And you can name it whatever you want. Additionally, you can double click here in the layers panel and do exactly the same thing. And by the way, this renaming technique works for every single layer type, not just for artboards. So the artboard, that's the first layer type. Now, another layer type is the text. And text usually makes up the majority of content in a web page. So if I'm going to zoom in here, you can see that we have a lot of text elements in our design here. And in the layer list, they are symbolized with this icon, uppercase and lowercase a's. And you can create text elements by using the text tool. So you would go to Insert, Text, or you can press T on your keyboard. And when you do that, you can click anywhere and you can add your text. And then you can change its properties by using the inspector there. So let's actually move this up so we can see it. Additionally, with the text tool, you can actually click and drag to create a text area, right? So that's gonna have boundaries, basically. All right, so as you can see here, this is now a fixed size and I can resize it like so. But more about that in a future lesson. So that's the text layer style. Next is the shape. So you can create shapes by using the Insert menu and choosing from one of the existing tools. You can create rectangles with the R tool, ovals or circles, rounded rectangles, lines, arrows, triangles, star, and polygon. So you can either click from here and then click wherever you want to create one. And for various shapes, you'll have various controls, as we'll discover in a future lesson. So you can either do it from the insert menu, or you can press the corresponding keyboard shortcut. And as you can see in our design, we have plenty of shapes here, and they are represented by this icon and also this icon. It really depends on the type of shape that we used. Also, when it comes to shapes, we also have vector and pencil. Now, pencil you can use to freehand a shape, just like that, in which case Figma will create what is called a path. And the vector tool does something similar, although you have more control here. You can work with different points. You can create curves, which are much more precise than using the pencil tool. But on both of these, Figma creates paths, but these are also considered shapes, right? So when talking about layer types, we have these shapes right here, but also the ones created by the vector and the pencil tools. And finally, we have images. Now, currently, we don't have an image or a layer type image in this project, although we have a lot of images being used. And that's because I'm using vector images here. So these are basically shapes. The logo, for example, is made up of several different paths, right? And I can see each one individually. But if I were to, for example, drag an image, this is a PNG image, you can see Sketch now displays this layer, this image layer, using this icon right here. So images, that's another layer type in Sketch. Now, we have three more layer types. First, we have the group, and you can see plenty of groups being used in our design here. So, for example, this is a group called main widget 1. And as you can see, when we select it in the layer list, it's also highlighted or selected in the canvas, and vice versa. If I select it here in the canvas, it's going to be selected here in the layer list. Now, to create a group, obviously you need at least one layer. So if I had one rectangle, I can select it and I can press Command G, and that's going to create a group. But of course, groups should be used for multiple elements. So if I have these two rectangles, I can group them together, and now they act as one. So groups, that's another layer type in Sketch. And then we have slices and hotspots. Now, the hotspot is a layer type, and that's used for prototyping. I won't really go into right now because I'm not covering prototyping in this course. So just keep it in mind that hotspots are used for prototyping. Slices, on the other hand, are another layer type that can be used to export certain areas of your project. So for example, if I go here and I select slice, I can hover on the logo, I can click it, and that's going to create a slice of the logo. And as you can see in the layer list, slices are represented by this icon. Now, what happens is that Sketch automatically marks that area for export. You can see in the inspector, it's set up as a PNG export at 1x size. And don't worry about exporting. We'll cover that in the final lesson of the course. But that's what slices do, right? They allow you to select an element, or actually a part, a region in your design that you want to export. So for example, I can click on an element just like I did before, or I can freehand it. I can draw an area like this, and that's going to create a slice of just that visible area, right? And I can rename it to whatever I want, and that's now marked for export. So using the slice tool, I can basically grab any portion of my design and export it without having to crop it myself later on. And just like any other layer type, these can be renamed. They can be grouped even if that's what I want. They behave almost like every other layer type. Now, before we wrap up, I just want to show you layer filtering and searching. If you look up here, where it says search layers, I can click and search for something. So maybe I want the text for statistics, right? So as I'm typing more and more, the layer list gets smaller and smaller, and it only shows me the layers that match my description, the stuff that I entered in the search box. And that allows me to easily find the layers that I'm looking for. Very useful for large projects. But what I can also do with this functionality is filter the layers by type. So if I just want to see the shape layers, I can do that. And now the layer list is just going to show me the shape layers. And in here, I can go in and I can search for whatever I want. Or maybe I want to search for the text layers. And if I don't want to also search for shape, I can click and then press backspace and delete it. So now this will only show me the text layers. Or I can choose from the other layer types. Image, group, exportable, this is slices. Prototyping, this is where a hotspot would come in. And then symbol, right? This is really easy to select all the symbols or all the symbol instances that I've used in my design. So that's layer searching and filtering. All right, so now that we know what types of layers we can use in Sketch, let's see about what kind of actions we can perform on those layers. That's coming up. Once you start building your Sketch project, you'll have more and more layers to deal with. And to work more efficiently, there are certain actions you can do with these. You can group them, you can hide them, and you can lock them. So let's start with grouping. Let's take a look at this main menu in my component here. So as you can see, I have several different layers for each menu item. But let's say I want to move them further up. I could, grab each item, move it, and then do this, and maybe this, but it's time consuming and it's messy. Or I could click and drag over all of them and move them at the same time. But actually, a much better approach for this would be to group these. So with them selected, you can hit Command-G to create a group. Alternatively, you could go to Arrange and then Group. And that's going to take all of them, create a nice group inside your layer list, which you can then rename whatever you want. And of course, this has the added benefit of making your layer list a lot easier to read. If you take a look at this page here, considering just how many elements we have, imagine how our layer list would look like if we didn't have any groups. But since we grouped everything, we now know that, okay, this is the menu, this is the user area, right here on the bottom. What else am I looking for? Maybe this one, the main widget, the 1, the 2, maybe the sidebar widget, right? So as you can see, they're nicely grouped. They're super simple to select. and they make finding things a lot easier. Now, if I want to ungroup the elements, I can select the group, I can right-click and choose Ungroup. Alternatively, I can go to Arrange, Ungroup, or press Command-Shift-G on my keyboard, just like that. And of course, if I made a mistake, I can Command-Z to undo to bring back that group. Now, once inside a group, you'll notice that when you click on an element, it selects the entire group. It doesn't select that element in particular. So how do you get to it? Well, it's simple. You double click. So you select and then double click, and then you enter inside the group. And here you can select whatever element freely. What about, I don't know, this one, the statistics, right? How do I select, for example, this text right here? If we take a look at the structure, we can see that this is nested quite deep inside, right? Here is the layer that I'm looking for. So I could, double click and then again, and then again, and I got to the item. But there's actually a much faster way. You can hold down Command and you can hover and select the element that you want. Do I want the expenses text? Hold down Command, click, and it's selected. Do I want the word may? Hold down Command, click, and select. So this is much easier than just, double clicking until you get to the element that you want. Locking layers can be used to prevent a layer from being selected and therefore moved or modified in any way. So let's take a look at this statistics widget right here. For the edges here, for the borders, we have a background shape, right? That's called a widget BG. So let's say that I want to select multiple elements by dragging over with the mouse, right? You can do that. So watch what happens when I click and drag. Well, I selected that background layer. So that's a problem. And in order to prevent this from being accidentally selected like this, I can lock it. Several ways to do that. Right-click, lock layer, or you can go to Arrange, lock layer, or you can use Command-Shift-L as a keyboard shortcut, or you can select the layer, hold down Option while hovering, and you'll see a lock icon. Click that, and the layer is now locked. So with it locked, I can now hover, click, drag, and select whatever I want. That layer can no longer be selected, so it can't be accidentally moved. If I want to ungroup it, well, I can click the lock icon, or I can right-click, unlock layer, or go to Arrange, unlock layer, or use the exact same keyboard shortcut. Hiding layers allows you to check how your project would look like without certain elements, but in a non-destructive way, meaning you're not deleting those elements, but instead you're just hiding them from view. So let's take a look, for example, at this section right here. Right? We have an activity section which displays certain transactions. And we have this icon that allows us to download the statement for that particular transaction. But maybe I'm not yet decided if I want to keep this. And I want to see how it would look like without the icon. So what I can do is I can go in, select the element, and of course I can delete it, but then I would have to undo. Maybe I'm forgetting that I deleted that element. And instead of using that destructive way, we can actually hide it by clicking the eye icon, just like that. So now the element is simply hidden from view. If I want to show it again, well, I can simply click the icon again, and the element is there. Additionally, I can right-click and I can hide it from here, or we can go to Arrange and then hide or unhide the layer by using Command-Shift-H. So if I select this, Command-Shift-H, hide, unhide. It's really easy to do. Another example of where we might use this is on this credit card design. Maybe I want to see how it looks like without this kind of decorative element. Well, I can select that, and I can use Command-Shift-H to hide it, or again Command-Shift-H to unhide it. And this way I can easily check how it would look like with and without the element. So there you have it. Now you know how to group, lock, and hide layers. Next up, let's talk about moving, resizing, and aligning elements. All right, so this is a pretty important lesson, so please pay extra attention to it. Moving, resizing, and aligning elements is something you'll be doing a lot when designing in Sketch, so it's worth spending the extra time learning how to do it properly. Ready? Let's start with moving. And let's start by zooming in the menu section right here. And as you can see, this kind of looks off. We don't have the proper spacing between these three elements. I want to be exactly 48 pixels between each one of these elements. So how do we do that? Well, the easiest way is to select an element and then click or left click with your mouse and drag it around. You can drag it here, here, in every possible direction. So if I want 48 pixels, I can do something like this. I just moved it up. Now, here's the cool thing about Sketch. It's extremely helpful in these types of situations because it gives us visual guides that allow us to position elements correctly. So in this instance, Sketch shows me that, hey, the distance between the logo and the element that I have selected is 48 pixels. And it also matches the distance between the green box on the right side and the text under it. So that's really cool. And that's one way of moving an element. But you can also do it with the keyboard, right? So you would select an element, you would bring it, let's say, kind of close to about here. You can see that we have 68 pixels now from the element above. And then we can use the keyboard shortcuts. So arrow up, arrow down to move it up and down by 1 pixel. You can also hold down Shift and move it 10 pixels at a time. And of course, arrow right, arrow left will move it right and left. So if I want 48 pixels, let's say it's here, and I want 48 pixels from the element above, well, I can hold down Shift, get it close enough, then nudge it 1 pixel at a time. So now it's exactly at the right distance. Now, in Sketch, we can actually check the distance between two elements by holding down Option, or first selecting an element, then holding down Option and hovering on the element that we want to compare it to. So here, we can see that the selected element is exactly 48 pixels from the element that I'm hovering. If I hover on this, it's 139. If I select the logo and I hover on the drop-down, you can see that it shows me the distance between the two elements. And if I hover anywhere on the canvas, it shows me the distance from my element to the edges of my document. And as you can see, we also need 2 pixels to the left here, so we have 48 and 48. So that is pretty useful. What about these items here. Maybe I want this to be a specific distance from the icon. Again, we can check. We can say, okay, we have 12 pixels. Maybe we want a bit more. We want 16. In which case, I use my keyboard shortcuts and I can position it exactly how I want. Alternatively, I can use the inspector to modify the X or the Y coordinates accordingly. I can even enter my own value in here, and I can even do math operations. So for example, let's say these items are right next to each other, so we don't have any kind of distance between them. Well, I can say, okay, the X position of the selected text is 298, and I want to move it to the right by 16 pixels. So instead of doing 298 plus 16 in our head, we can do it directly in the inspector. Hit enter, and Sketch calculates things automatically for us. And this works for all of these inputs here. I can change the angle, I can change the position, the width, the height. We can do mathematical calculations within the Sketch inspector. And finally, let's take a closer look at this element here. Let's say I want to position this badge so that the top is aligned with the top of the icon, and also its left side is aligned with the right side of my icon. In Sketch, we can do that really easily because Sketch shows us these red guides. See, as I'm moving elements? For example, now it tells me that the badge and the bell icon are vertically aligned, right? So I can easily do this and this. And now because I have those guides, I can release and the item is now placed where it should be. When it comes to resizing, here's what you do. Let's take a look at this area, for example. This box should be as tall as this box, right? So how do we resize it? Several ways we can do that. First of all, let's select the background. And as you can see, Sketch gives us some resizing controls. So I can click on each one of these and then resize it to my heart's content. Alternatively, I can use the Command key and then the arrows. So Command arrow down will increase its height. Command arrow up will decrease. Of course, in increments of 1 pixel. If I also hold down Shift, I can do this operation in increments of 10 pixels, right? So this is a really simple way of resizing an element. Alternatively, we can go in here in the inspector and change the size manually, like so. Or we can do mathematical operations. So really, we have a lot of options. In my case, the height that I'm looking for is 216, so I can either do it manually like this, or I can enter the value directly. And then I'm just going to line this back in. So that's how you resize an element. Let's look at another example. Let's say that in our menu, I forgot to add a menu item for transactions. So what I do is I create the text, and then I need to bring in the icon. For the icons, I usually use an app called Icon Set. And in the Ion icons set that I've used in this design, and you can find a link in the video description, I'm going to search for these swap icons. And from here, I can Command C to copy it. And then I can come in here and I can paste it, or Command V. But notice these items are super big. So I need to resize them to fit 20 pixels. width, and height. How do I do that? Well, I'm going to select them, and then I'm going to click on the bottom right handle, and I'm going to resize them like this. But we have two problems here. First of all, these are not resizing proportionally, right? So let's undo that. Instead, let's hold down Shift while dragging. So now that's better. It locked the width to the height. So whenever I'm resizing the width, I'm also resizing the height. But we have another problem. Notice that as the icon is getting smaller and smaller, those lines are getting thicker and thicker. So what exactly is happening here? Well, without going into too many details, for this kind of application, resizing is not the correct way of changing an item's size. Instead, we need to use scaling. So to use scaling, you would press Command K. Okay, and this will bring up scaling options right here in the inspector. And we can scale like this by clicking and dragging on that icon. Or we can specify a certain amount in percentages, or we can specify a certain width or height. So let's specify 20 pixels width and height. And as you can see, that scaled the element nicely. And of course, I can also use the handles. So by using scaling, I'm able to bypass the problem that we had with the thickness of these lines. And that's because resizing, so normal resizing, will keep the same size for layer styles such as stroke, border radius, shadow size, and so on. Scale, which is what we did here, will resize those properties as well. Okay, so that's a very important distinction that you need to make. So let's bring this down to 20 pixels, click Finish, and now I can move this in place. I can actually zoom in, and by the way, you can zoom in by using Z, holding Z actually, and just clicking and dragging over the area that you want to zoom to. Additionally, you have some other controls here. If you click, you can zoom in using Command plus, Command minus to zoom in and out. You can also press Command 0 to show the actual size, so 100%. You can press Command 1 to fit everything into view, but holding down Z, clicking and dragging over an area is very, very handy. So now I can just move this in the correct place and I'm good to go. So just in case you didn't fully understand the difference between scaling and resizing, let me actually grab this icon and I'm going to group it up, and I'm just going to drag it outside in the canvas. Okay, so now I have this group. Now notice this is made up of elements that have borders, right? So they're not filled, they don't have a fill property. So when I select this and I resize it normally, see the inconsistencies? The border size will actually stay the same, but as it's getting smaller and smaller, as the element is getting smaller and smaller, things are gonna start to get too crowded, so we get this undesirable result. But with scaling, right, those borders are resized as well, so the element just keeps the correct appearance regardless of its size. So just keep that in mind. If you're resizing an element and it looks wrong, then maybe you need to scale it instead. Finally, let's talk about aligning elements in Sketch. Now, there are two ways you can do this. One is by using the controls in the inspector, and two is by using the guides. And you've already seen those red guides in some previous demos. So let's take a quick look at some of these menu items here. You'll notice that some of them are actually off. They're not aligned with the others to the left side. So what I can do here is I can select these, and using the inspector, I can align layers to the left. Now this will align the layers to the outermost left layer. Okay, so if this was here, all of these layers would be aligned to the left of this one, like so. But of course, since I want to align them to the left of this, I'm going to select them like so. And of course, this also works on the other directions. So here you can align them to the right side, you can align them to the middle, and of course to the top, to the middle, and to the bottom. So you can align them horizontally, or you can align them vertically. And I can actually show you that if we take a closer look here. So let me actually zoom out. Now, I want to align these three elements vertically, right, to the middle. And let me actually group these up. I can see that these two, if I zoom in, they're almost perfectly aligned. So I can select them and I can click this icon, and Sketch will do its best to align these properly. But what about this one? This is positioned way down compared to the middle line here. So I can select these three and I can align them just like that, to the middle, to the bottom, to the top, however I want. Alternatively, I can click and drag, and Sketch will show me the red guides. So here it tells me that this item, the date, is properly aligned in the middle with the search box. And also its left side is properly aligned with the boxes below, right? With these. Let's do that again. See how easy it is to align elements? You don't have to do it by eye. You have these two options. Either use the inspector or use the red guides that I just showed you. What else? If we take a closer look here in the credit card area, we can see that these are not properly aligned. So we can select this, hold down Shift, select this, hold down Shift, select this, and then we can align them to the right like so. And alternatively, we can click, hold down Shift, by the way. If you hold down Shift while you're moving an element, it's gonna basically snap or stay in that direction. It can't really go up or down very easily. So I can just align it like that. You've also seen some controls here in the alignment panel. And these are for distribution. So the first and the second one are for distributing elements. So for example, I can use those to properly distribute the distance between a group of items. Notice on my menu here that we have a small discrepancy in the spacing here. And if I want to create equal spacing, I can use distribute layers vertically. We're just going to click distribute unevenly. And now this creates roughly the same distance between these items, right? So if we check, we have 25 there, 25, 25, 24, Sketch does its best to create equal distance, but sometimes you're going to have a small, like 1 pixel gap somewhere, which is totally fine. Nobody is going to know it's there. And distribute horizontally works exactly the same way. In fact, I used that exact method when creating the vertical lines for this chart. So if these were off, let's say they were something like this, okay? Let's mess these around a little bit. Okay, so now the vertical lines are not displayed properly. Well, what I can do is I can select all my vertical lines and I can click this button that says distribute layers horizontally. Distribute unevenly so we don't have to work with subpixels, right? So now those will be placed exactly where they should be. And the way this happens is that Sketch looks at the first and the last item. It calculates their position. It determines how many items must fit in between those two, and it automatically calculates what distance needs to be between each item. And it does its whole magic like that. And that's about it for moving, resizing, and aligning elements. Quite a lot to go through in a single lesson, but thankfully Sketch makes it super simple for us to perform these actions. Now, let's move on to certain features that are present in pretty much any design software nowadays. And those features are guides and grids. Coming up. Sketch has 3 features called guides, grids, and layout, and they're used for aligning and also resizing content. So let me go through each one and show you what they're all about. Before we talk about guides, you should know that all 3 features can be applied to artboards. Okay, so not groups, not the canvas itself, but artboards. That's the only way they're going to work. So, with that said, let's begin with guides. And to show you the basic operating principle, I'm going to create an artboard. And then to get access to the guides, you need to bring up the rulers. You can do that by using the keyboard shortcut Control-R. Alternatively, you can go in here and select Show Rulers. So this is going to create a vertical and a horizontal ruler. And as you can see, as you're scrolling on this ruler, there are some vertical and horizontal red guides. And when you click, that's going to create a guide at that position. And it works the same vertically. If you want to move a guide, all you got to do is click on it and move it to the desired position. And this works in both directions. Now, what can you use these for? Well, remember when you were in school and you had those notebooks with a vertical line on the side so you know where to start a new line of text? Well, the principle is roughly the same. You can use guides in Sketch to align content. So for example, if I were to select this artboard, you can see that I have a guide set at 48 pixels from the very top. And this allows me very easily to align elements to it. So for example, I can select the logo, and if it was out of place, I can simply move it up and it will automatically snap to that guide, making it super easy to align elements. And of course, I can set one vertically at 48 pixels, and then I can use it to align elements in the other direction, right? So that's super, super helpful. And that's about it, really. These are the guides in Sketch. You can use them for alignment. but also, of course, for resizing. So, for example, if I were to place a guide, let's say here, and maybe one here, then I can say, okay, I want this box to span in between these two guides. So I can get it and I can resize it to match the new layout. And when I'm done, Control R again to hide the rulers and the guides. Now, what about grids and layout? Well, a grid and a layout can be applied to an artboard, as I was saying. So for example, if I were to select this artboard, I can go in here and I can say show grid or show layout. So let's start with the grid. This is basically a series of vertical and horizontal lines that create this pattern. And you can define the size of this grid by going to grid settings or pressing Control-Command-G. Here, you can determine the block size, let's say 32 pixels or 64 pixels, and then where exactly do you want the thicker lines to be. So let's actually go with 32 so you can see it better. And then you can also alternate the colors. If you don't like the red, you can go with blue color. It's entirely up to you. And then confirm, and you have basically a series of guides that you can use, again, to align and size elements correctly. So, for example, I can very easily draw shapes that match this pattern of guides created by the grid feature. This is very useful when you're creating icons in Sketch because you can be very precise with your measurements, with your alignment, and so on. For UI design, I don't think it's that beneficial to use a grid, but it's there if you need it. And since we're on the topic of UI design, probably the feature that you're going to use out of all these three is layout. And layout works something like this. So let's hide the grid by pressing Control-G. And then let's bring up the layout. Control-L. Now, layout allows you to define columns or rows. And you can change the layout settings to display, as I was saying, either columns or rows or both, right? You can do something like this. But the cool thing is you can specify the total width of your columns, the offset or the spacing on each side, how many columns you want, let's say 6. The gutter is the distance between columns, and you can define that, and you can also define the column width. And when defining the column width, some of these values will automatically be calculated. And of course, you have some options here for determining how the grid looks like. And when you're done, you would hit confirm. So then, with this layout applied, and I believe I said grid earlier, I meant to say layout. So with these columns displayed like this, you can use them as guides, basically. You can, align elements to them. You can resize elements. And when you're done, just press Control-L and they'll be gone. And this is super useful for interface design because when we're talking about websites, for example, Bootstrap, the very popular front-end framework, uses a similar 12-column grid system to create layouts, right? So you can use the same 12-column system to create your design, and then when you go and develop that project, you'll be able to use roughly the same settings in CSS. Now, for our project, I have created a layout which looks something like this. So it's a 12-column layout, and let me just show you the settings here. So 12 columns, 35 pixels gutter width, 80 pixels column width, and this creates an offset of 32 pixels on each side. And with this in place, my page looks something like this. Notice how I aligned all of the elements to the grid. So we have 3 grid columns dedicated for these 2 elements, but also for the widgets in the main page. Then we have 2 grid columns dedicated for the main menu navigation and also this bit here at the bottom. And the rest of 7 columns are dedicated to the main content. And even in here, I'm setting aside 3 columns for this bit, 4 columns for this, and the rest of the elements just take up the rest of 7 columns. All right, so this is one example of how you can use a layout in Sketch for UI design. And again, remember the keyboard shortcuts Control-L to toggle the visibility of this layout, and also Command-L to get to the layout settings. All right, and that's about it for grid, guides, and layout. Great tools for aligning and resizing elements. They really allow us to create those pixel-perfect designs every time. Now, let's move on to working with text coming up. Typically, text represents the majority of content in a website or an app. So having the proper tools to be able to control how that text looks like is very important. And thankfully, Sketch does really well in this regard. So in this lesson, I'm going to show you how to work with the text tool, but also how to use text styles. Let's go. I have the demo app opened up here, and there are a couple of things that I need to add to this page. First of all, in this credit card design, I still need to add the credit card number, the card holder, and also the expiration date. So let's go ahead and do that right now. Now, to add some text, you can grab the text tool or press T on the keyboard. Alternatively, you can select it from here. So I'm going to click inside here, and I'm just going to add the card number. And when you're done, you can just hit escape. Now, I want this to be white. So I'm going to go to the inspector, and I'm going to click this field. And using the color picker, I'm just going to choose white. Alternatively, I can paste in the hex code right here. Now, I want this to be a little bit bigger. So, scrolling down, I can either do it like so with my mouse cursor, or I can click on this and select the size from the drop-down, or if I can't find the size, I can enter it manually. In my case, I want 23 pixels. I also want this to be a little heavier. So by clicking here, I can choose the font weight, and I'm going to choose semi-bold. Apart from these, we can also change the letter spacing by using this field. We can choose the line height. We can choose the spacing between paragraphs. Then we can choose how to align the text. So is it center? Is it right side? Is it justified? And then also, if we have a fixed text layer, we can choose the vertical alignment, but we won't get into this right now. So that's my card number. I'm just going to move it around a bit, and I'm going to align it with the other elements. And I'm also going to move it inside my card here. So what I can do is click and drag inside, and now it's inside that group. And this allows me to align it a lot better with the elements around it. And I can make sure that I have proper spacing, like so, and we're ready to move on. Let's see about the card holder, right? Let's add another piece of text. I'm going to say card holder. I'm also going to set this to white for now. And as you can see, this actually borrowed the styles that I used last. I want to bring this up above all of the layers. And I want to make it a lot smaller and also uppercase. So how do I do that? Well, let's start with this medium. I forgot to mention this, I'm using the Poppins typeface, which can be changed from this field. So medium, we'll go with 11 pixels. And then I can click this little cog icon to bring up some additional text options. And here we can choose from the text decoration, underline, or strike through. But for me, I'm going to keep it at none. And also how to capitalize the text. For me, I want to use uppercase. Also, I'm going to set 1 for the character spacing, just to give a little bit of breathing room between each letter. Finally, I'm going to change the color of the text to white, but white with a bit of transparency. So by clicking this picker, I can see that it's set to white, and I'm going to use this slider to bring it to 50%. So now it's semi-transparent. Okay? So now let's align this properly. Let's position it just like that. Then I need the actual card holder name. So I'm going to hit Command D. This will duplicate that layer. Alternatively, I can just do Command C, Command V. It does the same thing. So let's position this about 8 pixels below. Let's rename it. Or actually, let's change the content. And let's change this to a different style. So I'm going to use semi-bold, 14 pixels font size. We're going to reset the character spacing to 0. And also, we'll bring back the transform to regular or no letter casing. And then let's change the color to full white. Okay, so we have these 2 elements. We need 2 more for the expiration date, right? So 1 more title, 1 more value. And what I can do is simply Command D, drag them over. I'm holding down Shift so they move on the same line. This time I'm going to say expiration date. Let's move this over. And then let's say 0425, for example. And let's also move this over. Now, let me introduce you to text styles. These are very helpful for situations when you want to reuse text properties. So if we take a look at this card example, we can see that we're using the same style on this. And also, this has the same style as this. But here's the thing, in the future, if I want to change this style, I'll have to change it manually in both places. Well, not with text styles. This makes it automatic. And here's how you do that. You select the element that has the style that you want. You go in here under Appearance, and you hit Create. You give it a name, let's say Test1. And then you select the other text elements that you want to apply that style to. And from the drop-down under this document, you select Test1. And apologies, it's just outside of the recording area here, but it says Test1. So I'm going to select that. So now both these elements have the same text style. Now here's the cool thing. If I decide, okay, I want a different color on this, I can choose either one of them, and I can change its color, let's say red, like so. And then when I hit Update, all of the other text elements that use that style will be updated automatically. And this works for pretty much all the properties here. I can change the font size, right? And as you can see, the text style now has an asterisk next to it, and it's italicized, meaning this has a change applied to it. And from this point, I can reset the style, which will bring it back, or I can update it. And all of the other elements that use that style will be updated as well. So let's actually bring this back. Let's change this back to white, 50%, and let's update. And I can do the same here. I can create a text style for this. Let's say create. You can name this whatever you want. Let's call it whatever. And then we can apply it to any text element in the page. And as you can see from this list here, I have quite a few text styles defined for all the text elements that you see. I have a style defined for this, right? For this, right? This is called body. I have one for this. This is called display 5. For these elements, right? So it's really helpful that every element or every text element here has a style applied to it, because it makes it much easier for me in the future. If I want to change something, I change it in one place, click update, and everything else changes automatically. So I showed you how to apply text styles to other elements, but there's also another way you can do that. So if you press C on the keyboard, and if you go here, you can see all the text styles that I've defined in the document. And if I want to use a certain style in my page, I can do that simply by clicking and dragging, and then entering my text. Just like that. And this automatically uses the small title style. Alternatively, I can double click, and that's going to do exactly the same thing. You can also see these text styles if you go to the components view here in Sketch and selecting this tab. And you can see all of them here. This is where you can actually edit them. So if you select, for example, body bold, you can change its name, and you can change its properties directly from here. And if you want to delete it, you can right-click, click delete, or just hit backspace, and it's going to do the same. And that's a quick introduction to working with the text tool and also text styles. Now, probably the next most common elements you'll be using in a design are shapes. So let's talk about those next. There are many different types of shapes in Sketch. We have simple ones like rectangles or circles, and then more complex ones like polygons and stars. So let me show you how to create and edit these shapes. And let's begin by taking a look at lines. And lines can be used in many different ways. For example, here in this chart, I'm using both vertical and horizontal lines to create the actual chart. But you can also use them very successfully for separating elements or separating groups of elements or certain areas in your design. So for example, in my case here, we could use a vertical line to separate the menu or this menu sidebar from the rest of the content. So for that, I'll grab the line tool, which you can do by pressing L on your keyboard or going to the Insert menu, Shape, and selecting Line. And once you do that, you simply click and drag to create a line. Now, notice that this is not fixed at any angle. It's freely moving around as I'm moving my mouse cursor. But if I hold down Shift while doing this, then the line snaps at 45-degree increments, right? So by holding down Shift, it's much easier to create a straight line. So let's drag it to about here. And I'm going to move it up like so. And let's also resize it. And I can also hold down Shift while resizing to make sure the line is straight. And I'm going to go all the way down to the very end. Now, to properly align this, I'm going to bring up my layout. I'm going to zoom in. And by the way, you can zoom in by using, by holding down Command and using the mouse scroll wheel, just like that. So with the line selected, I'm simply going to nudge it using the arrow keys so that it matches the end of my layout column here. Let's hide the layout. That's pretty good. So now let's go ahead and give this the proper color. And for the color, as you can see, for a line, only the border property is activated because this is essentially a border. And we can control the width or the thickness of the line by using the width property here. And I can use this color picker to determine the color. And I'm just going to use a color value that I set previously here. I'm going to use black 10, I believe. And don't worry about where or how I created these. I'll show you in just a little bit. So that's the first separating line. We can actually call this vertical separator. And I could use another one to separate kind of this top area right here from the rest of the content. So for that, I can grab the line tool yet again, click and drag a line just like that. But I want this to be a little bit thicker, so I'm going to increase its width to 4 pixels. Also, if we zoom in all the way, notice that the ends here are square. I want these to be rounded, so we can actually use the end type for these open shapes, and I can set that to rounded, just like that. And with this selected, I can also change its color, let's say to black 10. So now it's simply a matter of aligning this properly. So I'm just going to nudge it down. And I think actually I'm going to leave it something like this. So about 48 pixels from the bottom here. And let's see, it should be around 24 pixels from the elements above. So I guess we just have to nudge these down a little bit, something like that. So those are lines. And if we can just double check here, we can see that this is not exactly aligned the way it should be. I can simply use the arrow keys to nudge it in place. Sometimes the line will start on subpixels. As you can see here, 280 by 0.5 on the x-axis, and I can remove that 0.5 so it aligns exactly with my layout line. And I can do the same here. And I can remove those subpixels manually. So now if we also do a quick check on the other side, resize this like so, and we're good to go. So those are lines. But we also have a lot more shapes we can use. We have rectangles, ovals, rounded rectangles, arrows, triangles, stars, and polygons. Now, I won't go through every single one of these because I think they're pretty self-explanatory. Instead, let's create a notification icon right here. All right, so I want an icon with a bell inside and some kind of badge that shows me the number of notifications. So let's check out the height of this element. It's 44 pixels. So let's draw a circle using the O tool. And to make sure the width and height are the same, I can hold down Shift. Notice, now it's exactly the way it should be. So let's make this 44 by 44. Let's align it properly with the rest of the elements. When it comes to fill color, I only really want a border around it. So I can either use a white background color or I can remove this color entirely. It's really up to you. Border width 1 pixel. Here I can determine where to place the border. So this is currently inside, but I can show it in the center or on the outside. And if you don't know the difference, let me actually change this to 10. And hopefully this will show you the difference between these types. So border on the outside means the width of the inside element is 44 pixels and 10 pixels of border is on the outside. If I place the border to the center, I basically have 5 pixels of border inside, 5 outside, and inside just means that the entire border is inside the element. So it's actually contained within those 44 pixels of size. But in my case, I usually prefer to leave it on the inside. And let's just bring this back to 1. And I'm going to change the border color to, let's say, black 15 or 30. I think black 30 should do the trick here. Okay, next, let's bring in a notification icon. So let's search for bell, or let's see, notification. This is the one that we need. So copy that, paste it in. Right now it's like super big. So let's lock the proportions here. That means when I resize the width or the height, the other value resizes automatically. Let's bring this down to 20. Okay, and let's move this inside, zoom in, and I can select both of these elements, align them to the middle like this and like this. Great. Now, visually, this is a bit off, so you shouldn't always trust the design software to properly align elements. If visually it looks wrong, then you can go in and, nudge it a bit. We can also, reduce the size of the icon a little bit until we get to the desired size. Okay, so that looks a little bit better. Let's actually grab this. Let's select both paths that make up this icon and change their color to just the black color that I defined in my document. Now, let's create that badge I was talking about. For that, we'll also be using the oval tool, and I'm going to draw a badge that's about 16 by 16. I'm going to remove the border, and I can also click this trash icon to remove it completely. And I'm going to change the fill to the accent color. Then inside, T for text tool, let's say I have 3 notifications. I'm going to be using pop-ins, medium 11 pixels. For font size, 0 for character spacing. I'm going to change the color to white. Then I can select both of these and align them to the center like so. And also I need to do a small adjustment to make sure everything looks right. Command G to group them up, and then I can align it just like that. Select everything, Command G, and we're good to go. All right, what else can we use shapes for? Well, what about this caret icon, this arrow down? In case we can't find an icon like this that we like, we can create it ourselves in Sketch very easily using shapes. So what we do is we go to Shape, Triangle. We can draw a triangle that's approximately the same size, let's say 8 by or 9 by 5. We can remove the borders. I can set the fill color to whatever I want, in this case black. And here, because this icon has rounded corners, I can do the same for mine. I can use this part of the inspector to either enter a value manually, or I can use the slider here. And that's going to round off the corners. We might need to make it a little bit bigger. And to rotate this shape, we can go here, rotate, or we can press Shift Command R, and then holding down Shift to go in increments of 45 degrees, we can flip it on the other side. And we can, I guess we can make it a bit bigger. Something like this. So it's really easy to create a shape like this in Sketch using the triangle tool. But since we're already using the icon from this icon set, we are good to go here. Now, another great use of shapes is for things like this. So this green background is actually just a shape. It's a rectangle with rounded corners. The same goes for the Visa card background, right? The widget background that you see here, right? This is also a shape. I don't have any fill for it, only a border. So how do you create something like this? Well, it's super simple. In this section here, I want to add some statistics. I want to display my total earnings for this month and my total expenses for this month. So let's go ahead and grab some titles. I'm going to hit C and go to text styles, and I'm going to search for the small title. Okay, so let's grab this, paste it in, total earned. And now we can close this. Let's actually move this inside my sidebar widget 1 group. And there are two ways we can do that. We can either click and drag it directly in, or we can cut it from here, Command X. We can select a layer inside the group that I want and hit Command V, and that's going to paste it right above that layer that I previously selected. So let's align this. Let's leave 24 pixels of gap between there. And let's grab the rectangle tool, create a shape, and then let's grab the text tool, and let's type in the number that I want to display inside the shape, which is this. So let's bring this over. This is currently sitting under the rectangle, and I can move it up like this, so it's now displaying above the rectangle. Alternatively, I can use the Command left and right square brackets to change its position. And then for the text style, I'm going to use a style that I defined previously, and that style is called body bold light. Right, so it's white, Poppins semi-bold 14 pixels. Now, let's take care of this shape. I can start by removing the border, adding a fill color as this green that I defined, and rounding off the corners. Let's set these to 8 pixels, just like this. Now it's simply a matter of aligning this properly. So I want 8 pixels of distance from the top and bottom. So let's do this. And now let's increase the size of the shape by using Command arrow up, arrow down, and then checking the distance with the Option key held down and hovering over the item here. So that looks pretty good. Let's select both of these. Let's group them up. Let's bring them inside the sidebar widget. And then I'm going to move this up so it sits 8 pixels from the title. And let's select both of these. Command D to duplicate. Let's call this total spent. And I'm going to pass in the number here. And I also realized that I forgot to add the $sign like that. So now I want both of these to fill the entire available space while also keeping a nice distance from the edges of 32 pixels, but also a distance of 16 pixels in between. So how do we do that? Well, it's super simple. We start by calculating the total width of the container. That's 309. So we select this shape and we say 309 minus 32 pixels on one side minus 32 pixels on the other side minus 16 pixels in between the two. And that's going to give me 229 pixels. If we divide this by 2, it gives me 114 pixels. Let's round this off. Let's set this to 114 pixels, just like that. And now let's align the text inside. Let's move this so that we have 16 pixel gap, and now we should have 33 pixels, which is totally fine. Let's also align this, and let's change the background color to this red. So there you have it. Another great use for shapes in Sketch. You can create these sort of badges, or you can even create buttons. We also created this notification icon, and shapes are really used a lot in a web design project like this. Besides text, shapes are the most commonly used elements, in my opinion. And those are the basics of working with shapes, but there's actually a lot more to talk about here. So in the next lesson, I'm going to show you some more advanced stuff, like reusing shapes and reusing styles. So I'll see you there. If you remember the lesson about working with text, then you might remember text styles, right? They were collections of properties you could reuse between different text elements. And whenever you would change that collection, it would automatically be applied to all the text elements that were using it. Well, shapes have a similar feature, and it's called layer styles. So let's go ahead and start with that. And looking at our page here, we can start noticing some similarities between elements. So for example, this area has a background that looks like this, green with rounded corners. If we take a look at this one, it's also green, also with rounded corners, the same amount of pixels as a radius. What else? If we scroll back up, we can also see that this circle here has the same green color as a fill. Of course, this being a circle, it doesn't have the rounded corners, but that doesn't really matter right now. And what else? Well, we have some additional elements here that could use that green color background. For example, this element. Currently, it's set to the accent BG. This is a layer style, but I wanted to use that green color. So how do we do that? Well, we can create a layer style. And that layer style will grab most of the layer properties we set on a shape and allow us to apply to other shapes, to reuse it basically. So what I can do is I can select this green background, or this shape that has the green background, and under Appearance, where it says No Layer Style, I can hit Create. And we're going to call this green BG. Okay, so now what I can do is I can select the other shapes that I want to use, these styles, and I can apply the style that we just created. Let's do the same here. And let's do the same here. This is inside a symbol, so it's a little bit different, but we get access to the exact same window here, and I can choose green BG. Now, here's the cool part. If I want to change this, let's say I want this to be a darker green, like so. So I change it in one place, I hit Update, and it's going to change on all the other elements that are using this layer style. And of course, I can always Command Z to go back to the way things were. And throughout this design, I have several layer styles defined. I have one for the red background that I'm using here, and I can search for it. Red BG. Let's also put it here. Red BG. I have one for this blue. I called it Accent BG, and I use it here as well, like so. And you can actually see all the layer styles by going to the components view in Sketch. And you can click this icon. And here you can see we have the backgrounds, accent, green, red, transfer. But also I have a widget BG, which I use here, right? So for all of these boxes that just have a light gray border, I use the widget BG layer style. And of course, just like with text styles, you can press C on your keyboard to bring up this window, and you can choose any layer style from here. You can create a shape even with that style. Currently, this is kind of outside of view here. There we go. So this automatically created a shape with that layer style. Pretty cool. Now, when it comes to reusing styles, and this applies to both text and layer styles, a very important concept you need to know about is color variables. So color variables in Sketch represent a way to save certain colors to your document and being able to reuse them over and over again. So if we go to the components and we go to colors, we can see that I have a number of color variables defined here. I have the accent, and for each we can give it a name and specify the color. I have a variation of that accent, that's 25% opacity. It's basically a tint of that color. Then I have the green, the red 50, a tertiary color. And then I have the black colors, right? So that's black 100%, black 0.5, 10, 15, 30, 50 opacity. These are basically tints. They're mixes of this black color with white. And then, of course, I also have a nice white 50% opacity color. Now, how do you create a color variable? Well, it's actually very simple. Let's say that I want to use a slightly different green color for these elements. So what I can do is I can go to my color picker. I can choose the color or the green that I want. Maybe I want something like this that's more towards blue. And then I can simply click Create Color Variable. I give it a name, and my apologies, this is a little bit outside of the recording zone here, but I give it a name. Let's call this Alt Green. And there's a button here that says Create. So let's click that. And now, in my color picker, I have access to all of these color variables. And I can display them like this as a list, or by clicking this button, I can display them horizontally like so, where I can only see like a thumbnail of that color. But personally, I prefer the list because I can see the names. So now I can reuse that color variable wherever I want. So if I want this to use the new variable or to use the new color, I can change it from here. I can select Alt Green. Now, of course, this will tell me that, hey, you're using the green BG layer style and you've overwritten the color. Do you want to update or not? It's really up to you if you want to do that. If we click update, then all the instances that were using that older green are now using the new one. So color variables are a great way of saving colors, because right now I can go back to the green that I was using if I don't like the new change. It's really that simple in Sketch. Now, when it comes to reusing shapes, I want to tell you about a really cool feature in Sketch called Make Grid. And this allows you to repeat an element or a group of elements in a grid pattern. And it goes something like this. Here I've created some savings goals. Basically, I have two shapes overlapping, showing kind of a progress bar. But I want to add two more. Okay, so what I can do is I can select this group, I can Command D to duplicate it, and then drag it down, and then do the same a third time, and then a fourth and a fifth, and so on. But after a while, it can get kind of boring, right? So what you can do, once you have two elements, you can select both of them, and here we have a little icon that popped up, and when we click and drag, we can create as many elements as we want. And we can do that in both directions, right? And right next to the mouse cursor, we can see the number of columns and rows. So this is 1 by 3, meaning 1 column, 3 rows. You'll notice that as I'm moving up and down, that number gets updated. So that's really, really cool. Now, once I have these selected, I can also change the distance between them by using this handle, or by using this field in the inspector. And then, of course, I can go in and change these values as I see fit. So maybe this will be something like this. I can change the number here. I can change the description, and so on. These are like regular groups. It doesn't create any component or anything like that. It's just a regular group. And I can do the same, for example, on the menu, right? We have several different menu items we need to add, but instead of, copy and paste all the time, I can simply select both of these, and I can drag down to create as many menu items as I want. And then I can go in and edit each menu item individually. Super nice, right? This is very useful for repeating content. So you saw we can use it here on the menu, we can use it here, but also we can use it here. It's enough to have just two of these elements, right? And then we can drag and create as many as we want. Same goes for these elements here, right? If we had more that we needed to display, right, we could just create two of them and then do this. Very, very cool functionality. All right, and those are some more advanced use cases for shapes and shape styles. Now, let's move on to images, because so far in this course, you've seen plenty of images being used in this design project, but I haven't actually showed you how to bring in images from your computer to Sketch. Let's take care of that next. Let's jump straight in here and learn about working with images. In Sketch, you can add images in a few different ways, and the easiest one is to simply drag and drop from your computer. So let's say we need a logo for our project, which we need to place here. And I have the logo in my downloads folder in two image formats. I have the PNG and I have the SVG. So in Sketch, you can simply click and drag, and that's going to be placed right in your dashboard or canvas or whatever you're loading it into. So this is an image layer type. You can see that from the icon that's being used in the layer. But there's actually something wrong with it, isn't it? Even though it's the correct size, it's kind of pixelated. And you can notice that even more when we zoom in. If we take this to 100%, I guess it looks fine. You can't really see it, But when you're starting to zoom in a little bit, you can start noticing that drop in quality. This is because the PNG format that I used is actually a raster format. That's what it's called. It's made up of pixels. And whenever you're gonna resize, it's gonna be all blurry and stuff. So let's click original size, and that's gonna take it to its, well, original size. Now, I wanted to mention this because I wanted you to see the difference between raster and vector. And vector is represented by the SVG. So if I drag in the SVG image, it's exactly the same size, but look at the difference between the two. So this is raster, this is vector. Okay, if I zoom in even more, you can clearly see the difference. The vector will be sharp regardless of how big or small it is. So I can very easily resize these two. Let me copy them here. So I can resize them to a huge number, and notice the raster on the left, notice the vector on the right. This is just as sharp, this is pixelated, unusable really. So I recommend for design projects like this, if you can, use vector formats, meaning SVG. The other formats like PNGs, JPEGs, GIFs, and so on, they're better used for other types of images, like a picture of someone, right? You don't have a vector version of that. It's a still picture. Okay, so for that, it's fine to use PNG and JPEG and stuff. But for this kind of stuff, for logos, for icons, for anything that can be represented as a vector, use the SVG format. It's gonna look great on all devices, on all screen sizes, and it's gonna make your life a lot easier. So for this, we're using the SVG. So that's one way of loading images in Sketch, is simply by dragging and dropping. Another way, of course, is to copy and paste. So if you remember, we've been doing this in this course so far. When you have an icon from somewhere that you want to get, not necessarily from this icon app. Let's say you have it in your downloads folder, right? So let's say you want to grab this one. So you copy it, and then you can go to Sketch and you can paste it in. Command V or right click and paste. And that's going to bring in that image into Sketch. And from there, you can make it bigger, smaller. It's just like any other layer. But there's also a third way you can use images in Sketch, and that is by using images as a background for a shape. So if we take a look down here in this area, I'm missing an avatar. So here I should have a picture of this guy. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, we could grab like this image and we can bring it in and then resize it. Let's say 64 pixels. Let's actually resize it like this. So this is actually, what, 40 pixels. So let's resize this to 40. Right, so I can bring it in, I can place it there. But then how do I create the rounded corners, right? How do I make it round, actually? Well, there are ways we can do that in Sketch. We can use a mask, for example. So I can click on this avatar image and I can choose mask, right? And that's gonna display that. But I don't want to get into it right now. It's a bit more advanced. Instead, let's delete this image. Let's select the shape, and then we can go to Fill, click here, and then I can choose the image, right? And I can go in, I can choose the image that I want. Maybe I want this, or maybe I want this. Okay, and that's going to be placed as a background for this shape. And because the shape is already round, I don't need to do anything else. So that's really, really cool. Now, something else I want to show you here is data sources. And this is a great functionality in Sketch for images, for text, for a lot of different things, but we're covering images in this section. So let's say that I'm designing something. I don't have pictures of like my final pictures that are going to be placed here. So I just want some placeholder ones. We can do that by clicking this button where it says image data, and we can go to sketch data and we can click on faces. And that's going to randomly get an image from this database. And I can always click refresh, and that's going to give me a different image. Very cool. Or I can grab images from Unsplash. So I can grab a random photo. And of course, I can always refresh and get a new one. Or I can go to search photo and I can search for people or portrait. Okay, and that's going to grab an image from Unsplash that matches my search criteria. And this is directly from Sketch. I don't have to go to Unsplash to download that image, then come back and bring it in. It's done automatically from here, which is fantastic. But for our purposes, let's actually set this back to this guy. So there you have it, a few different ways of adding images to your Sketch project. Now, previously we talked about, or we worked with shapes, but we only worked with the simple ones. What about the custom ones? What about the ones that you create yourself, the more complex shapes? Well, let's cover those next. Now, when I say custom shapes, I mean irregular ones. So no squares, rectangles, circles, none of that. Basically, I'm talking about hand-drawn shapes. And in Sketch, we can create those with the vector tool. Let me show you. Let's take a look at the statistics here where I created this chart. And if you remember from previous examples, we had lines going up and down, just like you would have in a chart, basically. And the easiest way to create that is with the vector tool. So you would go down here, choose a vector, and here's what you do. Creating a vector like this, or a path, basically, is all about creating various points. Okay, and once all those points are united, you create a shape. So I can do like this. Right, and I unite that, and now I have a shape. But in my case, let's do something like this. So I'm going to start here, and then let's go something like this. So we have 1 point there, and then maybe we're registering a slight increase in income, something like this, something like this. And then let's end it right here. So when I'm done creating my shape, I can hit escape. And now this is a path. With it selected, I can click finish editing, and I can go ahead and change the border color. So let's use green for that, and also 2 pixels width. So that's my first shape. And that's for the earnings. For the expenses, I can do the same thing. I can grab the vector tool, and I can, start here. I can go like this, like this. It really depends on what kind of shape you need to create. Right? So same thing. I can also hit enter. Let's give this a color of red. 2 pixel opacity, and now I have my chart lines. If you want, you can also double click on a specific path, and that's going to bring up all the points, and then you can click and drag them with your mouse, and you can move them around. So this is completely editable even after you create it. And you can even play around with the border radius here. So you can set a radius for each point and make it a little bit more rounded. And you can even select all of them by hitting Command A. That's going to select all the points, and you can change the radius on all of them at the same time. So if we do like 32 pixels, that's going to create a smoother line throughout my chart here. So that's one use case for the vector tool. But if we take a look at the ends here, you'll see that they're a bit off, and that's caused by the border radius. So you might want to just apply that radius to only a few points. So that's one use case for the vector tool. You can use it to create some of these irregular shapes. What about this Visa card here? If you remember from the previous renders, this looked a little bit different, right? It had some like decorative elements going through it. Well, this is actually what the vector tool is best known for, because you can create things like this. So you can start here, and then maybe you can go something like this, and you can click and drag to create a nice curve, and then you can go here and extend that, and then maybe you can go like this. All right, and you can close that off, hit enter, and now you can actually remove the border, you can add a fill to it, you can set an opacity. All right, at any point you can go back in, edit certain points if you don't like the way they look. Maybe this is something like this. Maybe you don't like the angle, so you can use these handles right there. Maybe bring this in a little bit. I'm not particularly good with the vector tool, but I do okay every now and then. So, you can create an irregular shape like this. And if you want to hide these excess parts, let me show you a cool trick. So you would, let's bring this in the card group like this. And let's also bring these two paths. Let's see where in the main widget 1, I believe they should be. Yeah. Okay, so coming back to this, I want to place it at the very bottom of my group. Okay, just above my card background. And to show or to hide the excess edges here, here's what I can do. I can duplicate the card BG. I can group this up, and I can set the card BG to mask. And the mask will basically hide anything that is outside the boundaries of that element. So in this case, because I set the card BG copy to be the mask, it's hiding anything that's outside the bounds of that element. And this is, of course, still editable. So I can hold down Command, select the path, double click, and I can go in and I can change these at any time. Maybe I want to bring this in a little bit closer. Maybe I want to even delete one of these points. I can delete it like this. So I can bring it in like so. So it's totally non-destructive. I can create whatever kind of shape I want with this. So that's the vector tool. Now, when it comes to creating paths, there's also another tool you can use, and that's the pencil tool. This is, I guess, a little bit more gimmicky because you can create whatever you want. It's like writing with a pencil on a piece of paper, right? And of course, you can create like a regular shape. You can, draw a shape like this, but it's not going to be precise. That's what I'm trying to say, right? You can't draw a straight line with the pencil, either holding down Shift or any other key. It doesn't really matter. The pencil is just used for free form drawing. So I don't have any use case for it in this project, but I just thought I'd mention it. So, you know, it's there. If you ever need it, you know where to find it. So that's the vector tool, very handy for creating custom complex shapes, just like you saw in this lesson. Now, earlier in the course, I said that Sketch is great for creating icons. And one of the reasons for that is the fact that you can use what's called Boolean operations. Let's learn more about those in the next lesson. Boolean operations are used for creating complex shapes, and as I was saying, they are great for creating icons. So let me show you what they are and what you can do with them. And let's do something very basic at first. Let me create two circles, one like this and one like this. And let's also give these different colors, like so. Okay, so we have 4 Boolean operations, and you can find them right here on the top. First of all, we have union, and this is used to create a shape that's the sum of the other shapes. So for example, if I were to overlap these two shapes, I can select them, and then I can hit union. And this will create a shape that's basically the merge of those two. As you can see, when I change the fill, it changes on the entire shape. Another operation I can do here is called subtract. It's this one. And this will basically remove the area of a shape from the one underneath it. So in my case, the shape that's underneath is the green one. So when I select both of these and I hit subtract, the shape that's underneath has a cutout that matches the shape that was above it. If I were to reverse the order here, if I were to put this under and I would repeat the same process, I would get a different shape. So that's subtract. Now we also have intersect, which is this one. Intersect will create a shape from the areas that overlap between these two shapes. So the area that overlaps is basically this one, right? So if I select both, intersect, I get this shape. And finally, we have difference. And this is the opposite of intersect, and it will create a shape from the areas where the original shapes don't overlap. So with these two selected, if I hit difference, it's going to create this kind of shape. Now, regardless of the Boolean operation that I used, the resulting shape is still editable. So I can collapse this group, and I can freely move the objects or resize them in any way that I want, which is fantastic. So those are the 4 Boolean operations. We have union, subtract, intersect, and difference. Now, let me show you how I applied these to this project. First of all, let's take a closer look at this Visa card. If you remember, we used a mask here to cut away any excess from this custom path that we drew earlier. But there's actually a second way we can do that. So if I were to ungroup and unmask, I would have a copy of the card BG and the actual path. And let me actually move the path a little bit, just like this. And then with these two selected, and I'm going to hit intersect. Now this will create a shape, and I'm going to detach the layer style from that, and I'm just going to pick black, and I'm going to give it a nice opacity, something like this. And the result is exactly the same. I don't need to use masking or any kind of technique like that. And the shape here is still editable. You can see we have a small problem here. I can just go in, select my path, move it up just a bit, and we're done. I can also use Boolean operations here in the chart. So maybe I want to display an element that tells me exactly the value of one of these points here. Okay, so how would I do that? Well, let's type a value, something like this. It doesn't have to be super fancy. As a text style, let's go with body bold light. Let's grab the rectangle tool and draw a rectangle under that text value. And let's set its layer style to maybe this one, the accent BG. Although we can color this in any way we want. Let's add some rounded corners. Let's position this correctly. So we have equal spacing around the text. Let's say 12 and 12 there on the side. Now let's say I want to add a little arrow pointing down. It's like a chat bubble, right? So we can actually grab the arrow from the drop down. So let's copy that. And let's paste it here. And this is a symbol. I'm just gonna quickly detach it. So all I'm left with is a shape. Right, so I'm gonna bring it up, nudge it up just 1 pixel. I'm gonna select both shapes, align them to the middle, and then I'm gonna click Union. And this creates a combined shape from my original rectangle and that small arrow. So now I can, change the color to whatever I want. Let's say I wanna set these to the black. I'm gonna detach the layer style and then select the text as well, group them up, and then position them wherever I want. And here, of course, I can also add just a small element. Let's also fill this with black, and let's add a nice border, white, and let's make it a little bit thicker, maybe like 6 pixels or something like that. And let's bring it above these paths, and then I can align it to the middle like so, and we're pretty much good to go. Right, so that's a really easy way of creating a custom shape like this using Boolean operations. And as I was saying, this is great for creating icons as well. So icons are typically made up of simple shapes like this, right? Take, for example, this icon or this icon, right? This is super simple to do with Boolean operations. You would have the main shape here, then you would duplicate that, and then you would use some subtract operations to create these smaller shapes like this. Or maybe this one, you would have a circle and then these bits that you can add using a rectangle or a line with rounded ends, and then you would do a union operation on both of these. What about this one? This is actually super easy to do. So we would have a rectangle. I'm just going to quickly draw this. No borders, maybe a bit of rounded corners, something like that. Then we have another rectangle. That's the base strip. And then we have a smaller rectangle here. I'm not going for absolute fidelity here. It's just a quick demonstration, right? So I would select this, and then do subtract, and then select this, and subtract again. And there you go. That's your resulting icon. Super simple to do. And of course, after the fact, you can go in, you can select the smaller rectangle, maybe give it some rounded corners to make it look a bit more realistic. So that's a very quick icon created using Boolean operations. And those are the Boolean operations you can use in Sketch to create custom and more complex shapes. Now, let's say you created custom shapes, buttons, pieces of text, components, whatever, and you want to reuse them throughout your design. Well, in Sketch, you can do that very easily using something called symbols. So let's talk about those next. In Sketch, symbols are all about reusing content. And by doing that, you're actually speeding up your workflow. Now, the nice thing about symbols is that whenever you make a change to the master symbol, all the other instances will receive those changes automatically, which is fantastic. So let me show you some examples. First of all, let's go to this earned versus spent section, where we have these two elements, title and then a badge with a number inside. If you remember, we had an additional one here that said total spent. Now, because these are relatively the same, and because I might use this type of layout further down the line, it's a good idea to make a symbol out of it. Okay, so to do that, I can press this button. Of course, I need to select the group first, then press this button, or go to Layer, Create Symbol, or use Command Y. Okay, so let's call this Title and Badge. No layout. Don't worry about this yet. We'll talk about layout in the next lesson. And also you have a checkbox here that says Send Symbols to Symbols page. I recommend you check this because it's just gonna send it right here in the symbols page, and you can clearly see all of them at all times. Now, let's take a closer look at the elements that I have inside the symbol. So I have a title that has a text style applied to it. I have this text, which also has a text style applied to it. And I have a shape that currently has no layer style applied. So let's fix that. Let's set this to green background. Now, this is what's called the symbol source, or the symbol master, I guess you would call it. Whenever you're reusing that symbol in your document, this is called a symbol instance. Okay, so it's basically a copy of the master symbol. And inside the layer list, symbols are represented like this, with this pinkish icon. Now, here's the cool thing about symbols. They have what we call overrides, or what Sketch calls overrides. Basically, you can change most of the elements inside the symbol instance without affecting the original symbol. So I can change the text, I can change any text style, I can change any layer style. So in my case, I had another instance here that says total spent. So I can change that, right? And this is happening independently of the main symbol or the other symbol instances. I had a different text value here, and also I had a different background. So I can use the red BG here. Now, please remember that in order for this to work, you need to have layer styles and text styles applied to the elements inside the symbol. And that's it. It's very simple. Now, if I make a change to the master symbol, let's say I want less spacing between the title and the actual badge, right? So I'm going to bring this down 4 pixels. When I save and I go back, I can see those changes reflected in the symbol instances. The content, right, the overrides that I applied are still there. They're exactly the same, but because I changed the structure of the original symbol, those changes are now reflected here in the instances as well. So this is fantastic. It really saves you a lot of time. And if I want to go back to the way things were, I can just move this back, save, and now it's back. If I want to unlink a symbol instance from the original symbol, I can simply detach it from here or right-click and detach from symbol. So now if I make any changes to the original symbol, like for example, move this to the right side, you'll see that that change is only applied to the symbols that are still linked, or to the instances that are still linked to the master symbol. Now, if I want to re-link this to a symbol, we can do that. I can right-click and I can set replace with, and I can search for my symbol here. And this is called title and badge. So I can do that, but of course any overrides that I did will be lost and I have to do them all over again. Now, looking at this section here, you might think that, okay, well, we can also use symbols for these elements, right? Technically, yes, we can. However, we're going to have a hard time resizing this bar across instances. So if we make a symbol out of this, that's great. On any instance, I can change this text, I can change this text, but I cannot change this, the width of this element. Any structural changes that you make to a symbol will be reflected on the other symbols. So you cannot have this bar be a certain width on one instance and a different width on another instance. It's always going to be the same. So symbols, yes, are great, but you can't use them for every single repeating element. You really have to consider the structure of that content and if it can be overridden from instance to instance. Another great use for symbols is right here in the menu. And this brings me to the discussion about nested symbols. You see, in my menu, each menu item is a symbol, right? And we can click this button to go to the actual source. Now, in the actual source, we have what? We have a piece of text, and we also have another symbol. Nesting symbols like this allows me to do a very cool thing, and that is to change the symbol per instance. So in my symbols page, I have defined all of these menu icons as their own individual symbols. Okay? So then in my instance, I can change the text and also the icon. And to get the best results, it's best that these icons are exactly the same size. But again, be careful, this can only happen if you have nested symbols, so symbols inside symbols. And I'm using symbols a lot in this document. I'm using them here in the menu. I'm using them here in the activity area. This is one symbol, right? If we go to the source, it looks something like this. But for each row, I'm changing this title, this title, this title, and also the text inside these labels. And at any time, I can go in and I can change these properties in any way that I want. I'm also using symbols here on today's rates. This is one symbol. It's called crypto coin. This is what it looks like. And then for each one, I'm choosing the crypto icon, which again, I have defined as symbols. I have them right here. And then I'm changing this text, this, and this. And the cool thing is now if I want to change the structure on all of these, I can simply edit the source. Maybe I want slightly more space here. I can save, and that's going to be applied to every single symbol instance. I think you get the point by now. So those are symbols in Sketch. And that's a quick look at symbols in Sketch. And I say quick because there's a few more things you can do with them. And if you're really serious about working in Sketch, then I highly recommend you discover these on your own and see exactly everything they're capable of doing. Now, there's actually one more thing I'd like to show you when it comes to symbols in Sketch, and that is an awesome feature called Smart Layout that's coming up. Smart Layout is all about automatically resizing a symbol when the content inside it changes, and it's doing that by maintaining the same spacing between items. Let me show you what I mean by that. So let's say you want to create a button, right? And buttons can have different text elements, they can have icons, and it's usually a good idea to resize the button to fit that text content, right? So let's say we have a piece of text here that says, "Click me." And you also add a rectangle under it that serves as the button background. So now let's assume this is your button and you want to make another one. All right, let's actually group this up and let's duplicate it. And this other button should say send message. Now, how do you resize this? Well, you have to do it manually, right? You have to select this, resize. You got to check your previous button to see the exact spacing there. So it's 9 pixels. You have to come back here, measure, resize by hand. It's a lot of work, right? If you have like 5 buttons, 10 buttons, you have to do this every single time. However, with Smart Layout, this has just become much easier. So what you do is you create a symbol. Let's call this test. And here under Layout, you decide how the content inside is going to be aligned. So you have horizontal, left, right, center, or right to left, or you have vertical, top to bottom, center, bottom to top. Let's go horizontal center layout. Okay, so let's create that. And now, whenever I change the text inside, that button background will automatically resize with it. Of course, keeping the same spacing on the top, left, bottom, and right side. All right, so the symbol here stayed exactly the same, but the instance is now resized, all thanks to this great feature called Smart Layout. And from the symbols page, when you select the source symbol, you can also change its layout from here. So if you want a horizontal or a vertical layout, and then you can change how you want the alignment to be. You can also specify minimum width. Let's say you want this to be 300 pixels minimum, right? So now these new instances will be at least 300 pixels. So this is a great feature. It's definitely a time saver, especially for things like buttons, but of course you can use them for other things as well. Now, in my page here, I used this functionality in 2 places. I used it here on the buttons. All right, so this is a simple button, and if we take a look at the source here, we have a horizontal layout aligned to the center. On this button with icon, I also used it, same exact layout. So now I can, change the text here, open transactions, and hello. Right, so as you can see, the button automatically changes. And I also used it here for these symbols, right? So if we take a look at the this transaction source, I have a symbol called transaction price, okay? And if we go to this source, I have a horizontal layout, but I have the alignment set from right to left so that when it resizes, it goes from right to left. And this allows me to place the symbol right here on the right side. And regardless of what kind of value I will add in here, it resizes from the right side to the left side. And this allows me to create some more complex layouts like this while still being able to modify the contents inside various elements. And that's smart layout, a functionality that ties really well with symbols, and one that I highly recommend you use. Now, we're almost at the end of this course, but we haven't talked about a very important aspect of Sketch, and that's exporting. Let's do that in the final lesson. So then, let's say you've created your design in Sketch, and now you need to pass it to a developer. But before you do that, you need to export some assets, right? The images you use, the icons, and so on. So how do you do that in Sketch? Let me show you. There are several ways of exporting your elements from Sketch, and I actually already showed you one in the form of slice. So if you remember slice, that allows you to basically draw a rectangle and automatically mark that for export. So that's great for, when you want to export just an area of a page, you can do that. You can select the export format from here. You can either give it a prefix or a suffix, and you can see exactly how the file name will be called, and also at what size you want to export. And when you're done, you would click Export Selected. But if you don't want to work with slices and you want to export items individually, you can do that as well. So for example, let's say I want to export this logo. Well, I can select it, and then I can go to Layer, Make Exportable, or I can click this little button right here. This also allows me to select the export format, let's say SVG, prefix, suffix, and I can also add another format. Let's say I also want to export this as a PNG, let's say at twice the size. And I also am going to add the suffix of at 2x. And once I'm happy with the export format, I can click Export Selected, choose my folder, and click Export. And I can replace the existing files. So now, in my Downloads folder, I have two logo files. I have the SVG, and I have the at 2x.png, which is a PNG file at twice the size. Maybe I want to export my profile image from here. Same thing. Select, Make Exportable, select the format, Export Selected. So now I also have this avatar exported at its default size. But of course, for things like this, I might want to, export them at a higher resolution, maybe even 3x or 3 times the size, or maybe even 5x, 5 times the size. And that will, of course, increase the quality of the export. We also have some slice presets here. Like, for example, if you're exporting for iOS, you might want to export these formats. If you're exporting for Android, you might want to export in these formats. And if you don't want a preset, you can just click the X and it's going to be gone. You can also use the File Export option to export every single item at once. So this includes slices, and also every item that's marked as exportable. And of course, you can uncheck certain items from here, or from Sketch, you can export the artboards to PDF, right? So that's going to create a PDF file with the artboard, which is great. And those are some of the exporting options you have from Sketch. And here I'm talking about images, but you can also, for example, right-click an element, and then you can copy either CSS attributes or SVG code. It's not exactly an export in the sense that you're not creating a file, but you can get some of these items to pass down to your developer, or maybe it's just for yourself. If you're writing the code, then copying some of these CSS attributes could be very helpful. So if we copy the attributes from this element and we paste them in a code editor, for example, let me open up VS Code here. Well, it just pastes or copies the background color and the border radius, because those are the properties that we apply to it. So that's it, exporting in Sketch. Now, in this course, we covered what I consider to be the essentials, the basics of using Sketch. And it's the stuff that a beginner should know in order to immediately be able to use the software. But Sketch is pretty complex, so I invite you to discover it further by playing around with all of its features and discovering its true potential. Before we wrap up, just remember that in the video description, you'll find links to download the file that we've been working on in this course, as well as links to any other third-party resources that I used, icons, fonts, and stuff like that. Also, if you have a question for me regarding this course or the topic of web design in general, don't hesitate to drop me a comment down below. I usually read these comments, and I'll do my best to help out if you've run into any situation where you might need assistance with Sketch or other thing in this area. With that said, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to check out the Envato Tuts Plus YouTube channel to learn more things like this, and also learn more about web design and web development and a whole bunch of other things. I'm Adi, and until next time, take care.